Welcome to the Answers Yes podcast, where we interview some of the most interesting people that have said yes to opportunities in their life. We hope that through these stories, you can learn to create your own destiny by saying yes along the way. Join us as we explore the new series covering topics such as passion, integrity, and hard work. I'm your host, Jim Riley, and I hope you enjoy these interviews as much as I do. I believe that everyone has an important message worth hearing. On today's show, I interview Curt Mercadante, who is an author, speaker, and coach. What I love about Curt is that he talks about helping people realize that freedom now is possible, that one's true potential can always be realized, provided their confidence and energy, and that's directed in the right places at the right time. Curt's one of those people that left a big career job, making a bunch of money, and realized he was doing it wrong. So please enjoy this podcast. You know, one thing I learned this morning during this holiday season is that we can always look at other successes and be encouraged that we can do whatever we want to do and believe and be whatever we want to be. I was listening to David Meltzer's interview with Griffin Thal, who's the CEO and co-founder of Pura Vida Bracelets. And if you haven't heard the story, it's a must hear if you're an entrepreneur looking to get started in a business. And the story of these two co-founders that made these bracelets out of Costa Rica, it's just incredible. So check out David Meltzer's podcast, and specifically the one with Griffin Thal. Encourage you all to have a great holiday season. Hello and welcome to the Answers Yes podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We have had such a wonderful month of shows. If you didn't catch Sugar Ray, I hope you do. We had Danny Dixon on here from Dixon Flannels, and we just keep bringing on some wonderful guests that have great information to share, and I hope it resonates in your life. Today, I've got Curt Mercadante on the phone. Curt, how are you today?
I am so good today. So happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's just, we're in the midst of this holiday season between Thanksgiving and Christmas and everything going on. Sometimes our life just passes by too quick, and we've got to step back and appreciate all the things that we have.
Yeah, I had an event a few weeks ago called Freedom Club Festival, and one of the speakers he's a radiation oncologist, TEDx speaker. His name is Dr. Bobby Canaro. And it was very interesting. He talked about the secrets of longevity, but one of the things he talked about were studies, and I wish I had it. You brought it up, so it triggered it in my mind in terms of age groups and how they feel in terms of time passing quickly or slowly. And, he asked everyone, the older you get, does it seem like, especially once you got past 25 or 30, like time has moved more quickly? And everyone in the room, almost everyone in the room, raised their hand and said, yes, absolutely. He actually shared a bell curve that showed between mid-40s was about when you reached that, and then time started slowing down again. But it was something he shared, and you just triggered that in terms of time moving so fast. But I found it such an interesting tidbit that I forgot about until you just said that.
Yeah. Well, I've got two girls, one's 4 and one's 5, and it seems like time is going by so fast. I wish, because I'm well over 40, I wish it would slow down an awful lot, because I'm enjoying every minute of every day with those two girls.
It's wonderful. I mean, being present is so important. And, in many cases it takes, or not many cases, in every case, it takes discipline. And sometimes the hard work's not in doing. The hard work's in forcing yourself to have those daily habits and rituals of getting up, owning the day, getting up, whatever time you wake up, right? Getting up earlier than you need to, just to kind of think. I meditate, affirmations, think about what you want to do and accomplish in the day, rather than going to bed late, getting up, throwing yourself right into the chaos of the day and the work and the email right off the bat, letting other people control your day. There's no guarantees that time's going to slow down. I mean, you and I enjoy our time with our kids, and it no matter what, it's going to go too fast. But there's certainly ways that we all have to work on things we do that are counterproductive in terms of speeding time up, which is just not taking control of our time and spending our days intentionally.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I talk about being a student of my calendar and looking at the white space and filling that, whether that's with
business needs, family time, or health and wellness for myself. And it's shocking how much white space you have on your calendar where you can fill that up with great positive things in your life, like time with your kids and things like that. So it's important to take the time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I have I limit. I like to say that work-life balance is BS because that just assumes that there's like work over to the left and life over to the right. But it's all life, and the way you broke it down is exactly right. I should say there's three facets of life. There's your relationships, yourself, and your work. And the key isn't balance. I have this stock photo that I use for slide decks that shows a woman on a tightrope stretched between a canyon, trying not to fall off and die. And that's the way a lot of us go through life, trying to find that balance, when really if you align everything and you can align your calendar in such a way that, I don't care if you're in a 9 to 5, an 8 to 7, or whatever, we all have the same amount of time in our day. Like you and I have the same amount of time that Mother Teresa had, or Ulysses S. Grant, or Abraham Lincoln, or you name the person. So a lot of people say, I just wish I had more time in the day. It's like, the amount of things that have been accomplished by people who had the same exact 24 hours is amazing. And usually when I say that to people, I don't say it to make them feel bad, but in a way I do,
Yeah, no, you're right. We've all been given the same amount of time. Speaking of time, you have a very similar background to myself. I spent many years as the vice president of marketing for a big company, international brand. I started my own brand. My specialty has been marketing. And then when I stepped out of the corporate world, I started some of my own companies and on into present day where I do a lot of coaching, consulting, and podcasting and some other various activities. With that being said, we all had our humble beginnings and where we started that ultimately got us to where you and I are at today, and that's helping others. And I was just so compelled by the story of your father, your own superhero, on your website. Would you mind talking a little bit about, maybe your early years, about your father and maybe how you got started into your own career path through his influence?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and thank you for asking. My dad was my hero. He was like a real life Tony Stark, right? He, Iron Man. He worked on, and a lot of this, he was much older, and I had half siblings on every side, on either side. My mom had been married before and had two sons, my brothers, and then my dad had been married before, was much older than my mom, and his wife passed away, and he had two kids, my brother and sister. And so my dad was much older than me, and so a lot of this happened before I was even born, and I found about it, quite honestly, in some cases after he passed away. My mom starts getting pension checks from defense contractors we didn't even know he worked for, but he worked on the space program. My brother tells a story that he overheard, or I don't know if this is true or not, that my dad worked on one of the first shoulder-fire missiles. He led the team that designed all the electronic switches in the Boeing 777. Would tell me stories of being out in the desert when he worked for Honeywell, and he had designed technology on fighter jets and watching them just skim overhead. And so he had this really cool career, and so he was my hero growing up. I mean, I was very close to both of my parents. My father was my hero, and I probably didn't realize how much until he passed away, which is unfortunately often how it is. Mm-hmm. And, he passed away in 2012, and we're sitting there at his wake, and these grown men in tears crying, and that cool career he had, not a one person mentioned his career. It was all about husband, father, volunteered in the community. He went to the University of Notre Dame. He was the president of the local University of Notre Dame club. He read audiobooks to the blind. And I was sitting there. Now, at that point, I was probably about 6 or 7 years into a very successful, profit-wise, at least revenue-wise, public relations and ad agency. And something had been wrong for a few years, and I didn't know what it was, and I wasn't fulfilled, and I felt guilty about it because I was doing what a man was supposed to do. And I had anxiety attacks. I was 40 pounds heavier than I am now. I mean, just bad things. I was on a cocktail of prescription drugs for everything from cholesterol to stomach pains to, everything. Mm-hmm. And everyone's sitting there, and at the time I had 3 kids. We now have 4 kids, and I'm sitting at the wake, and here it was like a slap in the face because my dad had set this example in terms of, not really, but before I was born, in his early years, he was all work, and that was it. But I think a changing point was in early to mid 80s. You know, the economy was on its way back. Reagan was elected in 1980, and the economy started to charge back, made one of the biggest comebacks in history. You know, inflation dropped dramatically, but it wasn't yet all the way there. 83-ish, 84. I was about 10 years old, about 8 or 9 years old. My dad lost his job, and he was in his mid-50s. I mean, this is someone who had been, you know, president of Fortune 500 companies. You know, he led the team in Elizabeth, New Jersey, for Singer sewing machines. They launched the first digital sewing machine. You know, and he missed my birth because of that. My mom would always say that. You know, he was a different person. It was all work. It was all work. Mm-hmm. Well, he found himself out of work, and it was a very humbling experience because mid-50s couldn't find work. But he never complained about ageism, never complained about any type of ism, right? And we had a very nice home. It was hard to afford without work. And so my dad was a very proud person, didn't want to take money from the government and others. He actually went and got a newspaper route. And they would get me up something like 3 or 4 in the morning. I hated it. And we'd go to this facility, and I remember I'd have to bag the newspapers. You know, my hands were black. I was dead tired. And then we'd hop in the station wagon, and my parents were in the front, and I was in the back, and I'd throw the newspapers out the back. And more than any other bit of schooling I've ever had in my life, that taught me more. Not just about, okay, hard work and getting up early and doing those things. But what happened right after that was my dad decided, well, I hate this. I don't want to do this forever. So he reinvented himself in his mid-50s as a management consultant and went on to have another 20-plus year career. That's when he designed the switches on the Boeing 777, worked for massive companies like Siemens, you know, traveled the world. But during that time, he never missed a recital, a soccer game, a cross-country match. He was always around. And so that's really what I grew up with and remember. And so sitting at his wake, when everyone talked about this, he had set this example for me, and here I was putting everything into work, harming my relationships, harming my self-care, harming, you know, myself with these feelings of guilt that were racking me because I was doing what a man was supposed to do according to whatever I had heard somewhere in society. But my dad had set this example. So I decided then and there, I'm making a change. I'm not fulfilled, but I'm making a change. And, of course, I did nothing, right? Because you're fearful. You're making 7 figures. You're like, well, I want to make a change, but I got to be responsible. I got to be practical.
Yeah. Curt, by the way, I don't mean to cut you off. Yeah. I want to stop on this newspaper route for a second because I think it's such a critical lesson. I think you said that was back in the 70s or so when paper routes were, you know, people had them. I don't even know if they have them anymore.
This was probably about 83-ish, 84.
Okay. I think the point there is that here is a man that wasn't too proud to go out and find work, whatever that work meant, and leverage that into making a life change because it gave him some time and opportunity to reflect. And I find so many people these days that are unsure about their careers or they just lost their job and they're saying, I can't find work, I can't this, I can't that. And there is always opportunity out there. Your story reminded me of a woman I met 2 days ago over the weekend at Chick-fil-A. She was a worker there. She was probably in her late 70s. She said she'd been living in the area for almost 40 years. And the Chick-fil-A job that she took part-time, more than likely making a minimum wage, she said was the best job she's had in her life.
Wow.
I doubt that that was her aspiration when she got out of college was to work at Chick-fil-A. But I think the point is there's lots of great work out there and opportunities if we open ourselves up to a little humility and maybe tuck our egos away and go out there and sometimes do what needs to be done, not only for our family, but for ourselves. And I didn't want to get too far past that paper route because that's what really resonated with me when I read your website the first time is like, I love that story. So thank you for sharing. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I just don't wanted to talk about it.
No, sometimes I get on a roll, so I'm glad you did that. You know, we watched, we're doing, you know, whatever it is, 25 days of Christmas here at our family. You know, we're watching a Christmas movie.